In April of 2007, a coyote walked through the front door of a sandwich shop in downtown Chicago, crossed a room full of people at the lunch hour, and climbed into the open drink cooler. It lay down among the bottles and stayed there for the better part of an hour, watching the room. Staff called for help. The animal did not panic, did not lunge, did not bolt. It had simply walked into the third largest city in America, into a fast food restaurant in the middle of the day, and decided the cooler would do. It made the evening news as a curiosity, a lost wild animal, a funny clip, a story for the end of the broadcast. It was none of those things. An urban ecologist who studies these animals would later call the behavior aberrant. Wild predators do not stand 6 feet from a crowd of strangers without a flicker of fear. This one did, because the animal in that cooler was not quite what everyone assumed it was. If you have ever caught something moving at the edge of your yard after dark and told yourself it was just a coyote, stick around. What we are about to lay out complicates that sentence more than you would expect. And if you already know a piece of this story, drop your county in the comments and hit subscribe, because we are about to explain why nobody agrees on what to call the animal that might be living closer to you than you think. Coyotes now live in the heart of nearly every major American city. Up to 2,000 of them share the streets and rail corridors of metropolitan Chicago alone. A breeding pair has denned inside Central Park in Manhattan. They raise young in Washington's Rock Creek Park and trot the greenways of Denver, Seattle, and Atlanta after the sun goes down. At the same time, in the rural counties east of the Mississippi, hunters have spent decades reporting coyotes that seemed wrong. Too big, too heavy in the jaw. Animals pushing 40, 50, 60 pounds, hunting deer in a way a coyote is not supposed to hunt. 2 patterns, one in the cities and one in the woods, pointing at the same unsettled conclusion. The animal people kept calling a coyote had changed into something else, and nobody could agree what that something else actually was. It is not the lean 20-pound desert coyote of the American West. It is not a wolf, either. Not the animal hunted out of the eastern United States a century ago. It sits in the space between the two, and that space is where this entire investigation lives. The first theory is written in its DNA, and the reading is stranger than most people expect. In 2014, a team led by the geneticist Javier Monzon, working alongside the ecologist Roland Kays, analyzed the genomes of more than 400 of these eastern animals using dozens of ancestry markers. The result was not a coyote. On average, the genome came back roughly 64% coyote, about 26% wolf, a blend of eastern wolf and gray wolf, and around 10% domestic dog. A separate review of 2 decades of genetic studies landed close to the same split. 3 different lineages braided into one animal walking the suburbs of the most densely populated part of the country. Kays called it an amazing contemporary evolution story happening right under our noses. The popular name for it tells you most of what you need to know: the Coywolf. How it came together is a story about a door left open. Coyotes were never eastern animals. For thousands of years, they belonged to the open deserts and grasslands of the American West, and nothing about the dense hardwood forest of the East suited them. But across the 1800s and into the early 1900s, settlers did 2 things to that eastern landscape at once. They cleared the forest for farmland, and they exterminated the wolves, shot and trapped and poisoned out of existence across the entire eastern half of the continent. That left the largest predator niche in eastern North America sitting empty. Around 1900, the coyote began to move into it. The expansion funneled north around the Great Lakes, and on that northern route through Ontario, the coyotes pushing east ran into the last survivors of the very wolves that had been wiped out everywhere else. A remnant population with almost no coyotes of its own to breed with, and not many wolves left to choose from either. So, they bred with the newcomers. Wolf genes moved into the coyote line. Dog genes joined in later from the feral animals trailing human settlement. What came out the other side was not the coyote that went in. It was bigger, bolder, and it swept across New England and the mid-Atlantic, reaching Maine by the 1930s, filling the exact vacancy the wolf left behind. If that number surprised you, wait until we get to the size these animals actually reach, because that is where the story stops being subtle. But first, if you are watching this somewhere between the Great Lakes and the Atlantic coast, this animal is very likely already denned within a few miles of you, whether or not anyone in your county has ever officially confirmed it. Save this video, and if a clip or a story from your area comes up in the comments, we read every one of them. An eastern coyote runs roughly twice the weight of a western one. 30 to 50 pounds is typical, and the outliers go well past that. An 82-pound male was shot in Newfoundland in 2012. Their ears and tails run shorter, built for dense timber rather than open desert. They hunt deer in pairs, running them in relays, and a single family group can put away around 600 pounds of deer in a year. Across the Adirondacks, New England, and the rural Northeast, this animal is now the dominant land predator, sitting in the chair the wolf was forced out of, eating much the same meal the wolf used to eat. That is the first theory, clean and well documented. A new predator assembled from 3 lineages in about 100 years, filling a gap people had emptied without realizing what would come to fill it. But it is not the only reading of the evidence, and this is where the investigation stops being tidy. The second theory comes from inside the same research community, and it argues the Coywolf label oversells what is actually out there. Kays himself is among the scientists who push back on it. By this reading, the animal is mostly coyote. The wolf fraction sits closer to a quarter or a third rather than a half, and it should be called simply the eastern coyote, not dressed up as something halfway to a wolf. It does not, as a rule, pull down a healthy adult deer on its own. Its prey is mainly fawns, the sick, and the winter weakened, usually taken in pairs, not full packs. Its family groups are a mated pair, and their pups, nothing close to the complex multi-generational society of a true wolf pack. And it almost never poses a danger to a person. Under this theory, some of the giant coyote stories that circulate around hunting camps are simply exaggeration layered onto an animal that is impressive enough without embellishment. The genetics are not in dispute here. Only the label is, and a label is not nothing. It decides how the animal gets managed, hunted, and talked about in every state it lives in. Which brings in the third theory, and it is the one that shows up again and again in the accounts of people who actually share land with this animal. Wildlife agencies have been slow, sometimes strikingly slow, to confirm what residents have been reporting for years. Farmers who bring in evidence of an animal too large for a standard coyote get told it was probably a dog or a large male coyote and nothing more. Hunters who report packs behaving like wolves get the same answer. Whether that reluctance comes from genuine scientific caution about a genuinely ambiguous hybrid, or from agencies simply not wanting to reopen the management and liability questions that come with admitting a larger predator has already established itself, depends entirely on who you ask. What is consistent is the gap between the official record and what people on the ground have been describing for decades, sometimes with tracks, sometimes with kill sites, sometimes with an animal standing in their headlights at dusk that was too long and too muscular to be anything they had a name for. Nobody in this story is lying. They are simply looking at the same animal from 3 different angles and refusing to agree on what they see. The scale of the thing, whatever you call it, is not in question. In 2018, Roland Kayes and James Hody mapped the species' entire spread from more than 12,000 records, and the picture is one of the fastest, broadest range expansions any large North American predator has managed. An animal born in the western deserts now occupies all 49 mainland states, from Alaska to Maine. It has crossed sea ice to reach Newfoundland. It has moved the length of Central America and crossed the Panama Canal, and camera traps now record it at the edge of the Darien Gap, the last wild barrier between it and a continent its kind has never set foot on. It did all of this during the same 100 years that most large mammals on Earth were losing ground. As Kayes put it, this animal is thriving in the human age precisely when almost nothing else is. The urban frontier keeps moving too. The Central Park breeding pair, tracked by local photographers under the names Romeo and Juliet, reached Manhattan by coming down from Westchester into the Bronx and crossing a rail bridge onto the most surveilled island in the country, where they now raise pups within sight of an outdoor theater. This is not a settled population holding steady. It is still expanding, still adapting right now, while the argument about what to call it continues in journals and agency offices that have not caught up with what is already on the ground. That is the real reason almost nobody understands this animal, and it has nothing to do with rarity. It is invisible because it is everywhere, wearing the disguise of an animal nobody bothers to look at twice. In cities like Chicago, it lives in the densest neighborhoods, while almost entirely avoiding contact with the people around it, moving at night, slipping along rail lines and drainage corridors, denning in cemeteries and golf courses, and the scrub behind strip malls. Millions of people who have never knowingly seen one have a new apex predator living within a few blocks of their front door. The proof is not hidden. It is overwhelming, and still, most people never look for it. So the investigation does not end with a clean answer, because there is not one to give. The genetics say hybrid. Kayes and other researchers say, be careful with that word. The people who actually live alongside it say the paperwork has not caught up with reality, and every one of them is working from real evidence. What nobody disputes is the animal itself. It carries functional wolf and dog DNA that a true Western coyote does not have, and that DNA does measurable work in size, in skull structure, in the ability to run deer in relays through terrain a smaller predator could never work. Whether or not a taxonomist ever signs off on a new species name, the thing standing in the tree line at dusk is not the animal that was there 100 years ago. So it ends where it began, in a sandwich shop in Chicago, with an animal lying calmly in a cooler full of bottles, while a crowd of people stared and had no idea what they were actually looking at. It was not lost, And it was not a joke. It was claiming ground the same way its kind has quietly claimed a continent, one rail line and one empty lot at a time, while almost everyone's attention was somewhere else. It is out there right now, in the dark, in the parks and the deer woods, and the gaps between houses, in numbers nobody has fully counted, and in a body nobody has fully agreed to name. If this is the kind of animal you had no idea was already living this close to people, hit subscribe, because we go looking for exactly this kind of story every week. And drop a comment if this is showing up where you live. We read every one, and we are not done digging.